Hello, Grid 2 fans. I'm Lee from Codemasters, and welcome to the very first live stream of Grid 2 here on Twitch TV. It would appear we're already suffering from a bit of lag. What's that? Okay, so I'm here with Toby. Toby, say hello.
Hi guys.
Toby, what is it you do on the game?
So I'm associate producer in the racing studio, and I've been working on Grid 2.
And over manning the chat box is Ben. Say hello, Ben.
Hello!
Also in the room we've got Luke, the community manager for RF1 Games.
Hello!
And making sure we don't mess about on the internet is our boss Sam.
Hey!
And finally at the wheel is our mono racing driver.
Hello!
Who does occasionally talk. Okay, so yeah, this is the very first live stream with Grid 2. What we're going to do is we're going to be showing you today a little bit about the game. Obviously, all the press previews have gone up. I'll switch over to Toby. Toby, if you want to sort of catch everybody up about what's happening with the game.
Sure, no worries. So as many of you may have seen, recently there's been a lot of press activity around Grid 2. We've recently announced the game, given the press a bit of an insight into the narrative behind Grid 2 and what the single player experience will hold. The embargo for that was set for today, Valentine's Day, the 14th of February. So you may have noticed that about an hour ago, a lot of press would have gone live covering the narrative and the single player experience. Worth mentioning that we also have joining us here Gihan Patharaja, our lead car handling designer, aka the Codemasters Stig. So hello again.
Hello, Grid fans. How are we doing?
So Gin will be the voiceless driver through our presentations here. Although you may hear the occasional screech and scream of happiness as he achieves the occasional overtake.
So Toby, what's the first thing we're going to be showing fans today?
Okay, Lee. So the first thing that we'll be showing is an event based in Barcelona. So if possible, it may be worth switching over to that video now. So this is actually a club level event at the start of Grid 2's career. It's actually based, as you can see, in Barcelona. It's a club level event, so I won't go too deeply into the narrative here. You can find a lot of detail online about that stuff. But basically towards the start of their career, you'll be taking part in club level events, which this is. So this is before the World Series of Racing becomes a sanctioned motorsport as such. This is very much kind of amateur club level. So you'll see there isn't much environment sponsorship around the side of the track. There isn't much in the way of fully sponsored vehicles, although there are obviously logos on the cars. This is very much the driver's own choice. The events at this level typically take place sort of late in the evening or early morning when the roads are naturally quieter, so the clubs can work with the local authorities to close down the roads. You'll also notice that the level of crowd along the side of the streets here are quite light. Of course there will be some. An event like this in the city centre is always going to draw a certain amount of attention, but these events are by no means advertised or promoted in any way at all.
So the mode that we're seeing here, this is called elimination mode.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
So this is sort of a classic mainstay of racing games. This is you have a grid of cars that are obviously set off from the start, and after the first 30 seconds or so, a countdown timer begins. And each time that countdown timer reaches 0, the car at the back of the pack is eliminated. So not too much pressure towards the start, but as you get towards the end with fewer and fewer cars, there's a lot of pressure to really get to the front of the pack.
So we've got about 5 seconds left now before we're out, have we?
Before our Codemaster Stig is eliminated. There we go.
Right, what we'll do now is we'll sort of hit the microphone on mute, and we'll turn the volume up a little bit so that you Grid fans can get a better idea of the game, and we'll show off some of the replay camera. So yeah, we'll be back shortly after this. Well, we're just having a slight technical problem with the audio, guys. Give us a second and we'll see if we can bring that back in for you. Okay, and we're back. We hope you like that first little bit of gameplay there. What we're going to do now is we're just going to take a few questions. We've had one from Pixelator. His first question is obvious. Is the handling similar in Grid 1 or is it completely redone?
Good question. So obviously Grid 1, the original Grid, the tagline in the studio for that title is it's all about the race. So the one thing that we absolutely cared about was the on-track experience that underpinned the entire game. It's completely about the connection that the car had with the track and that obviously went down very well with the original Grid. What we found is that as it's been obviously 5 years since the original, all the technology that's evolved through the Dirt franchise, Dirt 2, Dirt 3, the F1 franchise, has all been fed back into the Ego engine, which is the engine that powers the game. What that means for us is that we're in a much stronger position now in terms of a physics simulation and everything that goes on around that. Obviously we've had improvements to the tyre tech with F1, we've had improvements to the suspension technology through the Dirt series of games, so we're in a much stronger position now from a handling and physics perspective than we were with the original Grid. That doesn't mean that we're going to be moving away from the original Grid's handling model and the feel of the handling. We're very much trying to sort of stay in line with the original game, but improve upon that, sort of using that as a base. It's worth mentioning the variety of handling that we have as well. In the event that you just saw in Barcelona, is sort of a good example. You've got everything from a four-wheel drive Volkswagen Golf R through to a front-wheel drive Alfa Romeo Giulietta, and the car that Gin was driving, our Codemaster Stig, is the classic rear-wheel drive BMW E30 M3. So a good range of cars there from the very start of the game.
Okay, we've also apparently, if we give a shout out to Nono, he's gonna he says he'll pick up the game at launch.
Big shout out to Nono then, or Uno as it may be. Sorry,
Nuno. Next question is from AR Project. Will the game support all popular racing wheels like the Fanatec, Logitech, and Thrustmaster?
Yes, definitely. So we work actually very closely with the wheel manufacturers. So all of the major wheels that are out there, we have within the studio, and we work with the manufacturers to make sure that it's set up absolutely perfectly. Something that our car handling team spend a lot of time on as well is the actual individual settings of the wheel. We actually tailor the game for each wheel to make sure that the saturation settings and everything are all just spot on for that hardware.
Yeah. Okay, so sort of moving on from Barcelona, what we're going to show people now is the Red Bull Ring. What can you tell us about the Red Bull Ring?
Sure. So, in fact, it may be worth bringing it up on screen, and our tame racing driver again can give us a demonstration while we're chatting about it. Good stuff. So this is obviously the Red Bull Ring, based in Austria, formerly known as the A1 Ring. It's a track with real motorsport heritage. This track was used for Formula 1 events back in the day. This is very much a move to sort of traditional European motorsport. So the cars that you're seeing on track are very much high grip, lightweight vehicles. So the examples we've got here are the KTM Crossbow, developed in Austria, so very much in its home turf. We've got the Aerial Atom, a British developed lightweight, high grip car, and the vehicle which Gin's driving, which is actually the BAC Mono. Fantastic vehicle, again, very lightweight. All of these vehicles weigh in at less than a tonne. The BAC Mono, for example, was developed by the Briggs brothers to be the ultimate sort of driver-centric, high-grip car. It's got a single cockpit, single-seater position, perfectly balanced, totally designed around the driver. It's actually worth mentioning that these cars, when they're manufactured, the pedal positions, seat positions and steering wheel positions are all tailored for the individual driver for the ultimate experience.
So, talking a little bit about that sort of customizability that we've got, obviously you can see there that the car's been sort of liveried up slightly, and we've sort of got the sponsors on there and everything. Is that the sort of thing that the players are going to have the chance to sort of decide where things go themselves?
Absolutely, yeah. Obviously there was livery editing in the original grid, so that we couldn't move away from that. It's something the team have been obviously very excited by and working towards. So yes, there will definitely be visual customization elements in the game.
So obviously you spoke a little bit about working with the Briggs brothers on the BAC Mono. How sort of heavily involved are the car manufacturers as a whole when it comes to actually making their cars feel right in the game?
Very involved actually, which is great for us as a racing studio. Obviously we pride ourselves in the physics simulation that we have in-house. We work very closely with them initially to get all of the real-world data and specifications of the car, plug them into the physics engine to get the cars handling as realistically as possible. But then to take that to the next step is obviously getting the manufacturers in, and most of the manufacturers actually come on site and visit. They verify the handling traits that are in game, and it's that relationship that really lets us push it to the next level. And it doesn't just cover the handling, it also covers things like the damage, the way that the individual vehicles actually deform, their unique strength boxes and where the crumple zones are within the car. The manufacturers are very eager to get that right, obviously, so that the damage in game is as true to life as possible.
So what sort of challenges do you have? Obviously you can't, BAC won't let you go out and crash one of their cars, so how do you make sure that you sort of get that feeling right?
Absolutely. Yes, very much working with the manufacturers who have very in-depth knowledge obviously of where the strength zones are within their own cars, where the crumple zones are, what materials are used. Obviously our own physics teams and handling teams have a good knowledge of the actual physics properties of all of the materials that are used in car manufacture. So the torsional strengths, which ones bend, which flex, which just shatter, and all of that's recreated in game.
Cool. Right. So there you go. That's 2 laps of the Red Bull Ring. What we'll do now is we'll shut up and let you guys enjoy some replay cam footage for just a few moments, and we'll be back shortly afterwards. Right, hello, and we're back. Just been reading through the comments. It's great to see that you guys are really enjoying the game, particularly Raffle334. Mate, your mum is probably behind you. You might want to take your headphones off and check. We appreciate that you really like the game. Quick question for you then, guys. From, I'll call him Leet Patchy. Does the game have more arcade or a realistic approach to its driving, or is it quite balanced?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, actually. Very good question. So, jumping back to the handling approach that we're taking for Grid 2 then, something that definitely feeds into this is the fact that at the very start of development, we decided that we weren't going to include any assists within Grid 2. And that was quite a bold move for us as a racing studio. Obviously, the guys have done a lot of good work with assists in the past, but that call was made. And the reason for making that call was that ultimately, as a racing studio, we feel that when assists are on, it blocks the player's understanding of the vehicle. If you have something braking for you, managing your throttle input for you, it all pulls away from that first-hand experience. You don't feel the car braking traction, you don't feel the oversteer, you don't feel the understeer. So that's the first point, the fact that the game doesn't include any assists at all. Beyond that, obviously, that introduced another question, which was how do we make sure that it's not too challenging for entry-level players, yet obviously offers a deep learning curve for the more experienced players. That's completely down to our handling model, which is a new process for us, which we call True Feel. Essentially what we do is we take the real-world specifications of every car in the game. We spend a lot of time putting those specifications into the physics engine, getting the car handling from a simulation point of view exactly as it would in real life. And that's verified by real-world racing drivers and vehicle manufacturers themselves. That's immense fun for us as developers at that stage. But obviously it's really quite tricky. So what we need to do at that stage is identify the core characteristics of each vehicle. So what it is that makes that vehicle behave in the way that it does and drive in the way that it does. So if you're looking at talking about a front engine rear-wheel drive American muscle car, very progressive on the oversteer, very smooth, whereas obviously a front engine front wheel drive car is going to tend to be a bit more understeery perhaps. So we identify what those core characteristics are for each car, and that's what's absolutely retained as we progress. So the next stage is we look at any blocking characteristics of each car. So if a car is front engine rear wheel drive, very drifty, or say let's take a mid-engine rear wheel drive car. So it's going to be a bit tail happy, but it's going to be a lot more snappy. So when you get into a drift, the back end might snap out all of a sudden. It's going to be tougher to control. What we'll look at doing then is perhaps tweaking some of the suspension settings a little bit, moving away from the real world values a little bit, just to draw it in a little bit, just as a race engineer would, just to make that car a little bit more accessible to drive. And what we're aiming to achieve essentially is just pull the car in a little bit so that it gets to the stage where anybody can get it around the track. So a novice player would be able to pick it up, get it to the finish line, whether it means bouncing off a few barriers or running wide on a few corners, that's fine, but they can learn and build on that. And the way that they learn and build on that means that they have to learn how the car handles and adjust their input accordingly, so perhaps brake a bit earlier from the corner. But through that process, they're learning about the car. They're learning that that car does tend to run wide, or they're learning that that car is a very oversteery car. But that's also where the depth comes from, because the more experienced players that know the cars like the back of their hand, understand that the physical layout of the car, they'll be able to set the car up perfectly for the corner, clip the apex, get the perfect racing line. They'll be able to essentially predict what the car's going to do. And it's that understanding of the car that we really want to build.
Awesome. I hope that's answered your question there, Patchy. There's a lot of guys in the comments as well that want to know about the handling, so I'm sure that's put a lot of minds at rest. One thing that we have got going on, Ben has very kindly offered to donate his own personal copy of Grid 2 as the very first competition prize, which you'll be able to win. All you need to do is just flick by our Twitter account, which is twitter.com/gridgame. Make sure you follow us. There's a tweet on there. Just follow the instructions, hit retweet, let everybody know that we're live streaming, and we'll pick a winner shortly. Couple more questions coming in. We've had one asking, is there going to be eBay in career mode like Grid 1?
eBay in career mode like Grid 1. So that was fantastic in the original Grid, the eBay in there. So there are a certain number of obviously things that we're not talking about yet, unfortunately. I know obviously we announced the game today, we announced a lot of the details, but there are certain areas of the game that we've been asked not to disclose, and although I'd love to talk about lots of areas of the game, unfortunately that's one of them.
Okay, so one thing I might be able to tease out you then. yesterday we sort of teased on Facebook the whole idea of the WSR. How does that work sort of across the whole of the game?
Sure, so the WSR is essentially the sort of underpins your single player career and narrative. So there are two things that you care about really when you're racing single player. There's your own progression as a driver. Obviously you're competing against some of the best drivers in the world, so you want to try and make a name for yourself. But at the same time there's the development and the building of this World Series of racing known as the WSR. So I'll try and keep it very high level. There's a lot of information out there on the internet, but essentially towards the start of the game you're approached by a character known as Patrick Callahan. And he's very much sort of almost like a Bernie Ecclestone type character. He's got obviously a lot of capital behind him, but he's got this vision of pulling together multiple disciplines of racing, multiple race types that you wouldn't usually see competing against one another, and drivers from all kinds of styles as well, drift drivers against sort of American muscle drivers or European grip drivers, to try and answer the question of who is the ultimate racing driver, who would win if you took a drift driver and put them up against, say, obviously a grip driver. So he wants to build this series, this WSR, to encompass all types of racing. Initially, it's very much, there are a very limited number of race types in there, but as you progress through your career, the WSR also grows, becomes more widely known across the world, more race clubs sign up to it, you get more drivers with different race styles entering, more race types start to appear in the calendar, and it ends up being quite a massive deal, very much a worldwide spectacle.
Okay, so we'll take one last question this round. This one's from Noble2909. What sort of experience can we expect from the multiplayer side of the game? Noble's actually one of the guys from the Apex Racing League, so a big shout out to all the Apex Racing League when they're there looking forward to Grid 2. So yeah, what sort of things can we expect?
Good stuff. So again, as mentioned, unfortunately there's limited amounts that I can go into, but I will give you some hints. So essentially, the approach we're taking to multiplayer for Grid 2 is a very new approach for us within the racing studio. What we're trying to do is completely separate out the multiplayer experience of the game. So taking cues from a lot of first-person shooters, there's going to be content in the multiplayer section of the game that you can't actually get to in the single-player section of the game, and vice versa. There'll be modes of play in multiplayer that are very unique to multiplayer. It's also very strongly tied into our RaceNet platform, something which you may have seen that's at a beta stage at the moment. RaceNet is going to be launched in full with Grid 2, and there's going to be a very deep integration between RaceNet and the game, and that's going to power a lot of new game modes that we haven't been able to do before.
Something that we should probably tackle. It's something that comes up quite a lot. We know it's something that's kind of haunted us since we first announced Grid 2. What can you tell us about cockpit view and sort of the reason why we haven't been able to add it to the game?
Sure. Yeah, that's a very good question. It's as you say, it's one that's come up a lot actually. We can see it's coming up a few times there. So by all means, I'll give a brief heads up. It's something that's already been announced, obviously, the reasoning behind it. But just to sort of reiterate, essentially, we're at the tail end of the current console generation. And as racing developers within the racing studio, we've very much pushed the technology within the studio, and we're now getting everything that's possible from the current generation of consoles. The tech that we're using has been iterated upon through multiple racing titles, not just racing titles, but also our first-person shooters, and we're literally getting everything we can from the consoles. Yet we knew that for Grid 2 we wanted to push things on and get a quality increase above the current games. So we're absolutely at the point where something had to give in order to push the general graphics quality up, texture quality, polygon counts. We had a new track streaming system which we've implemented for Grid 2, which allows us to do longer tracks than ever before. But all of those ideas required additional processing power, additional memory budget. So we knew at the start of the project that our ambition outstripped the processing power of the consoles. So obviously we began the process of looking where we could potentially claw back something to allow us to implement these new systems which are going to benefit the entire game. At that stage, obviously there are a lot of things that we could potentially claw back. We could potentially make savings in lots of areas, so we had to be really careful about what we were looking at. So we looked at a lot of data in terms of how people play our games, how people play racing games, and massive amounts of statistical data that came back. What we found was that overall about when it comes to head cam and cockpit cam, around 5% of the players of our previous games actually use that as their primary view. in terms of using it constantly to play the game. A lot of players we were seeing would switch in there, have a look in cockpit cam or head cam, but then move out. So the fact is that only 5% were actually using that as their primary view. And due to that, obviously, it was an obvious choice. I mean, it is a shame not to have it in there. I mean, obviously, our cockpit view looks great from a visual point of view. It's fantastic. Some people do enjoy it. But ultimately, the decision was made that to benefit the overall game, get the longer tracks in there, up the visual quality across the board, it was the right choice to make.
Yeah.
And I still think it was the right choice to make now.
Well, I mean, hopefully, sort of showing the game to some people tonight is hopefully going to change their mind and set a few people's minds at this. I mean, this is Grid. This is everything that it possibly could have been. So I think it's great to finally be able to show it to people for a start.
Definitely.
Yeah. So coming up next, what we're going to do, we're going to venture over to Chicago now. This is for one of the later stage events in the game. Tell us a little bit about where this sort of sits in the whole career mode.
Sure, yeah, so again, I'll keep it quite light, but essentially Chicago sits sort of much later in your career. This is when the World Series of Racing is really starting to take form. In fact, we can probably switch over to our racing driver to actually give us some footage of Chicago, so you can see what we're talking about. Here we go, so this is Chicago. So as mentioned, this sort of falls much later in your career. This is very much a World Series of Racing event. So this takes place at night time, prime time TV, so when the streets can be closed and it's really prime time viewing time. You'll notice there's masses of trackside sponsorship going on around the track. There's fireworks, big LED billboards, massive crowd. This is really a high budget spectacle of motorsport. On the car front, actually, you can see that, speaking of Chicago, there's some US muscle here. Again, just going past a Mustang. So Ginn himself is driving a Camaro SS, Chevrolet Camaro SS, modern day reincarnation of the classic Camaro. So this is, as I was talking about earlier, classic front engine, rear wheel drive, American muscle car. Be very drifty, very fun around the sort of 90-degree turns. So the other American muscle car we have in here is the Ford Mustang, which is the 5th generation Mustang.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier, just when sort of back when we were showing off one of the earlier tracks, was that we touched a little bit on about the different sort of disciplines that each country has, and obviously there's like a race team for each country. I mean, what sort of teams will you be racing against when it comes to Chicago?
Sure. I mean, yeah, as I mentioned, there are a lot of race teams in the game, and the race teams each have their own speciality and their own star drivers and their own specific disciplines. And as you travel around and recruit these clubs to take place in the World Series of Racing, their own disciplines start to merge in with the WSR. With specifics regarding the clubs, we'll be announcing those very soon.
One question that everybody's going to ask: Raven West were like the big baddies of the first game. Are we going to see a return to them, or you're going to hold that out for now?
Well, we'll hold out on that, but one thing I can confirm is that there will be, as mentioned, personalities in the game, clubs in the game. You very much choose your own path. I mean, some people are going to be good at some events and not so much others. Some people may have a completely different preference. So while obviously there's this broad variety of content in the game, you will naturally choose what to focus on yourself, and that will feed into sort of the rivalries that play out as well.
Cool. Right, so what we'll do now, we'll do the same as we've done earlier. We'll knock it over onto replay cam and let you guys just enjoy sort of the track for a few moments, and we'll be back with you to ask a few more questions. Hello, and we're back. A couple of you guys saying you want to see a little bit more gameplay, so it's only right that we give it to you, we think. So Toby, a little bit about this mode. Obviously there's a timer counting up at the top of the screen, but we didn't really talk earlier about what players are actually seeing.
Sure, yeah, so this is a checkpoint mode. This is, again, a classic sort of racing mode. What you're seeing is the checkpoints are illuminated with flares around the track. Gin's racing against the clock essentially to cover as much ground as he can before he runs out of time. So every time he passes through a checkpoint, you'll see that he gets a time bonus added to his countdown. And he wants to try and keep that topped up. He's not going to be able to keep going forever. Eventually he's going to run out of time. And by that point, the distance that he's covered will determine the winner. You can see in the top right hand corner of the screen there, the distance is actually increasing in feet.
Okay, so a couple of the PC guys, they want to know sort of a little bit more information about how it's going to run on the PC. Are we going to be supporting DirectX 11?
Yeah, absolutely. The guys have done some fantastic work with DirectX 11 actually in the graphics team. So yeah, they're definitely supporting that.
Yeah. Sort of, you can't quite hear it now, but obviously when we were running the replay, the people that are watching the live stream would have been able to sort of hear the music. But we've done some quite clever things with the music that we necessarily haven't done with, that isn't traditional for sort of normal racing games, where it's quite dynamic as opposed to what's going on screen. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so people asking about that actually are probably thinking back to the Le Mans races, or the Le Mans race in the original Grid, the 24-hour race, where the music would come in towards the end and add all sorts of drama. Obviously we wanted to keep that style in the game, see how we could push things on further. So yeah, there definitely is interactive music in there that you'll feel building the tension.
Okay. So right, I think one thing that it probably seems right that we should do, there's a lot of guys watching on Twitch TV right now in the chat box. So we've shown off tonight, the first event that we've shown off was at Barcelona. Then we moved over to the Red Bull Ring, and this one's obviously Chicago. We're going to do one more sort of race for you guys to watch. So what we want you to do is in the comment box, just write down what it is that you want to see. If you want to see Chicago, Red Bull Ring, or Barcelona, just jot that down and we'll take a sort of a rough guess as best as we can, and we'll show you that one last time before we get off tonight. One of the questions that's just come up in the chat box, a couple of comments saying the game looks arcade. Is that what we're aiming for?
We're aiming for the highest visual quality possible, actually. In terms of visuals, obviously the graphical quality is something that we pride ourselves on within the racing studio. So obviously all of the tech that's evolved over the recent titles that we've developed, Dirt 2, Dirt 3, the F1 games, all feeds back into the Ego engine, along with the physics improvements that we touched upon previously. Obviously there are always graphical improvements being made, and they always feed into our next title. So we're at a stage now where Grid 2 can visually be a fantastic follow-on to the original Grid.
Sort of in Chicago, there's a couple of things that I'm a bit of a movie buff, so I won't say which films I noticed from, but there's a few parts of Chicago that I just sort of noticed from some films. I mean, how do you guys sort of get the inspiration for Chicago and sort of laying the road out? Is that the actual road track as it is in Chicago, or have you just taken sort of the vibe of Chicago and made a race around it?
No, you definitely will recognise sections. The lengths that the guys on the level design teams go to is incredible. They actually fly out to these locations and photograph every square inch pretty much of the sections that they're trying to recreate. They'll literally walk along the road, and at every metre they'll take a 360-degree panoramic of photos. Anything that sticks up from the track surface by more than sort of 5 mil, they'll measure and photograph every curb, every grate, and that's of course realistically modelled in game, so you'll actually feel these steam grates as you're driving over them.
Yeah. Okay, so we've done sort of the quick poll in the Twitch TV box. It seems that Twitch TV has spoken and they want to see Red Bull Ring again. So what we'll do is we'll just swap all of this over for everybody to see. Sort of while I'm doing that, what is it that you do on sort of a daily basis on the game? What's an average day as a game developer for Grid 2?
Well, that'll totally depend on who you speak to. For myself, working in production, it's quite a varied role. I'm quite lucky, obviously, to be in this position. It means that we can, while we have the boring job of obviously maintaining the project schedules, looking at the budgets of the project and resource allocations and all of that side of things, we also get to work sort of directly with the manufacturers and be sort of a point of contact with our licensing and legal teams. We deal with feedback from manufacturers directly. Obviously, when they come in to visit on site, we coordinate those visits, work with them to get their feedback and their impressions of the game. Also other third parties, whether they're sort of hardware developers, people such as Thrustmaster, Logitech and the rest, obviously working with them. So yeah, you get a real mix. Every day is different.
Cool. Right, okay, so we're pretty much ready to go on Red Bull Ring now. We'll just switch this over for you all. This was very ad hoc and made up at the last moment. We wasn't planning for this.
So what actually may be worth, for the people that want to actually view the gameplay footage, we could always probably ramp up the volume here just to be the actual gameplay.
Yeah, we can do that, certainly, there's no problem. Right, okay, there you go, guys. That was the final race of the evening. We hope you've had a great time. It's certainly been good fun for us showing you Grid 2 for the first time to the whole of the internet.
Definitely, quite the experience. Live on the internet.
Live on the internet. A couple of things. Obviously, a few things that have gone on today. Obviously, there's a massive amount of previews that are up right now. The best thing to do to find out sort of where all the best previews are and everything, follow us on Twitter, which is @GridGame. You can also find us on Facebook as well at facebook.com/GridGame. All of the news that's coming up over the next couple of days, we'll be reposting this video, so if you've just tuned back in, don't worry about missing the whole thing. You'll be able to watch it all again. The website's just gone live as well. We've got a brand new spanky shining website. Over on the website you'll be able to find links to all of our Twitter and social stuff, all of our videos from the past before. You will also be able to find sort of all the buttons to pre-order the game as well. Obviously Grid 2 is going to be out on May the 28th in the US and the 31st in the UK. It has been great. It's been our first live stream. It's been a bit bumpy, but I think we've done okay. So yeah, from me, thank you very much, guys. Toby, say your goodbyes.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. It really has. Yeah, an experience for me as well. This live stream stuff is pretty cool. So I think also a round of applause should be had for our silent racing driver, Gihan Patharaja.
Okay, guys, thanks a lot. We've been Code Masters. Thanks for coming.